Should I start a podcast in 2023? I'm Jen Eads, the head broad in charge at the Brassy Broadcasting Company. Let's talk it out. Now, most of the experts that want you to buy their course or their launch program this year, they're going to say, of course you should start your podcast in 2023. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, there is no better time than the present. And my friend, that is true. That being said, I don't know if you should start a podcast in 2023. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Instead, I'm going to give you some facts and some questions to ask yourself so that you can determine if podcasting is right for you. Let's start with the fact. According to Edison Research in their 2022 Infinite Dial survey, they said that 177 million Americans had listened to a podcast. That's a lot of people listening to podcasts, and that number will continue to grow. You know what number doesn't matter if you're thinking about starting your podcast this year? The number of podcasts that are already out there. That's one of the concerns that a lot of my clients have. Well, there's already so many podcasts out there. Is it too late to start? No, the number of podcasts already out there doesn't impact you. That's like an author saying, well, how many books are out there? Should I really write a book? Do we need another book in the world? Or a songwriter asking, are there too many songs out in the world? Should I really sit down and write another one? And technically, even that number of 177 million Americans that have listened to a podcast, that really shouldn't impact your decision either, because not all of those 177 million Americans are your people. Just keep in mind that the number of podcast listeners does continue to grow. Now I'm going to give you some questions to consider if you're thinking about starting your show this year. Number one, why do I want to start a podcast? Does this feel like a calling, or does it feel like one more thing that you heard that you should be doing so that you can be in all the places? If it feels like just one more thing that some expert said that you should be doing, don't do it. Take that energy, those resources, that time, and do something that's going to light you up instead. But if you do feel like you're actually being called to start your podcast this year, ask yourself, what do I want this podcast to do for me? We're told so often that we always need to be creating value for other people. But let me share this with you from my own experience. Showing up to create the best podcast that you can possibly produce and consistently get it out into the world, that's a big investment of time and money and energy and resources. So it's okay for you to know that you want to get something out of it. You should be getting something out of it. Be clear on what you want, especially if you are doing this for your business. Think about how you are going to define success for you and your show. Please don't say big download numbers and monetization right out of the gate and getting in new and noteworthy in iTunes. I don't know why I feel like I was just possessed by Jennifer Coolidge right then, but we're just going to keep on moving. You don't control any of those things. Start by focusing on things that you can control and that you can measure. I have some clients that have found value in the ability of their podcast to build deeper relationships with current clients and to start building relationships with prospects. Starting a podcast has actually given some of my clients time back because they've done episodes on the questions that they keep answering over and over again. Now, the next time someone asks them, they can just say, here's the link to this podcast episode. Give it a listen, and then we can have a better conversation once you understand the basics. Podcasting is also a phenomenal opportunity for you to practice your listening and communication skills. Now that we've talked about you, let's talk about your audience. Who is your audience, and how will starting this podcast serve them? Do you want to educate, entertain, inspire, build community, or maybe just make someone feel like they are less alone in a struggle that they're facing? And if you don't know exactly who your ideal listener is, that's okay. Don't let that stop you. Make the podcast that you want to hear, but maybe that you can't find right now. It's okay to be your ideal listener. Those podcast hosts are actually some of the best because they are bringing curiosity and energy and passion to the topic. I started a podcast about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a few years ago with my coach because when I started training, I couldn't find the podcast that I wanted to listen to about Jiu-Jitsu. So I just decided to make my own. And it turns out there's an audience of women around the world that were looking for that same kind of podcast. And finally, make a list of those things that you think potentially could stop you from showing up and producing new episodes. If you know what those potential obstacles or struggles could be before you ever get started, then you can put a plan and some processes in place to handle them if they pop up. If you've been thinking about starting a podcast but you haven't done it yet, tell me why in the comments. Maybe I can help. Okay, so real quick, let's recap these 4 considerations to think about when you're deciding if you should start a podcast or not this year. Number 1, why do I want to start a podcast? Number 2, what do I want this podcast to do for me? Number 3, what do I want this podcast to do for my audience? And number 4, what could possibly stop me from showing up and producing new episodes? That's it, friend. Those are the 4 considerations that I have for you today. If you want to follow my day-to-day adventures in podcasting, content creation, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, playing music, or you just want to see really cute dog pictures, then connect with me on Instagram. I'm hanging out there at Brassy Broad Jen. And if you found this video helpful, make sure that you subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be putting out new videos regularly. Thanks for tuning in. Now get out in the world and do some good.